Okay. Thank you all so much for joining me today. My name is Ben Alter. I am the Economic Development Specialist here at Grand County Economic Development. And today we are going to go over how to apply to the 2 local business grants that our department is rolling out this year. These are both pilots, so our goal is not only to disperse funds to really awesome projects, but also to learn from this process so that in the future, when we fund awesome projects, when we create grants, we do it so that it's easy and it's accessible for everyone in the business and nonprofit and all over the community. So let me know. And on that note, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get going. Let's see here. And could I get a thumbs up from someone out there that you are seeing the local business grants page? Awesome. Okay, I'm hearing from Sarah that she sees it. Okay, great. Thank you, Abby as well. Okay, great. So I'm going to go through this, and again, you can send chat questions if you want, and I will address them probably after the webinar, and also we'll do an unmuted session when I'm done. So if you've got a question, just write it down for now, I think is the best way to do this. So I've been publicizing this all over town. Hopefully you've heard of grandcountyutah.net/grants. This URL up here is not that pretty, but if you do grandcountyutah.net/grants, it will go here. And hopefully you've been to this page and you joined the webinar through this Meet. Otherwise, you probably found it in an email. Let's see here. Let me make sure I'm admitting everyone as we do this. Cool. I think we got everyone. So if you go to this page, this is where all 3 of our grants are living right now. I will say that we are, oh, hold on one second. What's up, Matt? Oh, which screen is it? Just see a meeting? Oh, okay. Hold up one second. Sorry, everyone. Classic incorrect screen share. My apologies. grandcountyutah.net/grants goes to this page. This is where all of our grant information is living right now. Down here, we have the event advertising grant, and that will be opening soon, but our Travel Council Advisory Board is reworking the scope of it right now. So if you click on it, it basically says, we're still working on it. If you have specific questions, you're welcome to reach out, but information on that is coming soon. The bulk of the conversation for today is going to focus on these 2 grants here, the Marketing Our Awesome Businesses or MOAB Tourism Grant, and the Sustainable and Resilient or STAR Business Grant. This is in the FAQs, but I'll just state right off the bat that the total pot for the MOAB Tourism Grant is $55,000, and the total pot for the STAR Business Grant is $500,000. For the MOAB Tourism Grant, we haven't placed a cap on the amount of funds that you can apply to, but we are aiming to disperse funds that are no larger than $5,000 per project. So keep that in mind if you're applying to that project. If you're applying to the STAR Business Grant, obviously there's a much larger pot there. And as I will show you in a moment, there are 2 different applications for the STAR Business Grant. If you're applying for $5,000 or more, that's a slightly larger application. We just want a few more details from you. And if you're applying for $4,999.99 or less, then it's a slightly smaller application. On that note, I'm going to start with the MOAB Tourism Grant, but I will stress that this and the STAR Business Grant page are both laid out similarly and have very similar pieces of information. So I'm going to just call out everything on here, and then when we go to the STAR Business Grant, I'll just call out a few things that are different. When you go to the MOAB Tourism Grant page, this will be gone after we talk today, and you'll find click here to start your application. We have a note here that when you do your budget for your application, we encourage that you break out items line by line, just in as much detail as possible, because With both of these grants, we're expecting a good amount of interest. And the more you can break down your project by line item, by expense, and by different aspects of the project, the better chances are we will understand your project. And also, if all the funds are not available, we can still partially fund your project, which I think for most people is better than nothing at all. But there is a question on there that, if you're all or nothing, we can also do that. And we do have an application due date. It's the end of the day on July 31st. If you have any questions or concerns about that, please feel free to reach out to me after this. With both grant pages, right after the application section, we have the requirements here. So the MOAB Tourism Grant has some extra requirements that the STAR Business Grant does not. They're both, I would say, not too onerous, especially if you've been in business for a few years, but I will touch on them briefly. So we have this commitment to county advertising ordinance. So take a look at the county advertising ordinance, which I'll show you where to find that in a moment, and take a read and understand what we are trying to promote and what we're not trying to promote. You don't have to align with what the county is trying to promote in terms of its responsible recreation and leave no trace messages, but we're asking that you not violate this ordinance. So if your tourism grant is arguing that you want to tell folks to leave a trace or something like that, it's not going to fly. But that doesn't mean you have to align it with that ordinance. Just keep in mind. Similarly, we also have a marketing scope. We're asking that folks market their services or whatever you can use your tourism grant for, a product, a service, a package, something like that. We're asking that you do that to folks who are already here or who we know are coming here. So maybe you have folks who are booked and are committed coming, or you have folks who are already in town. But we're not necessarily trying to advertise to a new market and say Houston and say, come to MOAB just for my business. While that might be really cool, that's just not what this grant is for. A completed grant application, that makes sense, I hope. We are asking for construction quotes if your project involves significant infrastructure modifications or construction, and we have a 20% contingency that we're accepting with that. So with inflation, with added costs, with a pipe bursting, we understand these things happen. So just keep that in mind and do your estimates to the best that you can. Those quotes will be required if your project has physical infrastructure, construction, anything like that. Oh, Matt's putting our grants in the chat. Thank you so much, Matt. Consultation with our local SBDC officer. This is a really important aspect of the grant that's, again, required for both grants. If you click here, you can schedule a meeting today with our local our local SBD officer, Megan McFall. Folks have been emailing her and telling me that she's out of town. She's having a great time, but she's getting back today. And you can still register to schedule your appointment right now and book it on her calendar. These are free consultation meetings. If you've been in business for a long time, and this might not be something you need that much, if you're just getting started, this could be a great resource. But either way, meeting with Megan is important and required. And it's also a great way to get assistance on this grant application, learn about other grants and loans and funding sources, and get assistance from Megan on those things as well. And it's all free. We have here profit and loss statements. We're asking that folks submit their 2021, 2020, and 2019 P&L statements. If you haven't been in business that long, or for whatever reason you aren't able to submit that, we're also asking that in lieu, you submit a projection or record of your organization's startup costs, and we'll just ask for a brief explanation of why you're including the documents that you are including. I've included here a profit and loss statement template. By no means do you have to use this. If you have your own forms, you are more than welcome to submit those. I had a question the other day about, do we have to do them in 6-month increments like the P&L statement here indicates? You don't have to do that. Years, 2 years, whatever, as long as we get the information that we're asking for. The project budget, I will show you where to find that in a moment. You can find that once you begin your application, and we will ask you to use one of our 2 templates. It's been souped to help you, I promise. And last but not least, your state of Utah articles of incorporation number. This is for both of us. It's for you just to make sure you know where to find that information, and I'll show you where. And it's also for us, we will be checking to make sure that your business or nonprofit is verified as active with the state of Utah. So if you haven't done that, it's a pretty easy verification process, and we can talk about that after this webinar. But folks who are not verified by the time they submit their application, i.e. not in active status, probably not going to be considered unless there's some circumstance that you can explain to us. So for the MOAB Tourism Grant, I have here the overview of the grant. We have the goal. We have why market tourism, just a little blurb. We have some examples of applicable projects, and we have some resources. I'm not going to read all of this. That's for you to check out in your own time. But I will show you a few things. If you're trying to think of a really cool application and you want to try and think outside of the box, you can click here for this brainstorming guide that we have from the folks at the Small Business Development Center, or SBDC. And this is just some different ideas on how you can create a great project. We also have those example projects right here, like I said, but by no means do you have to use these examples, and I encourage you to think of something better. We have data here that we use to understand visitation to MOAB. These are some of these occupancy reports that I do. You should check those out and see maybe when you want to use your funds. What's the most important time for you and why? When are people coming to MOAB? When are people not? Stuff like that. If you're looking at that data and you have more questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. These financial assumptions template right here, this is more so if you are doing a profit and loss statement for the first time and or you are reporting on startup costs. Again, if you've been doing business for a while and or you know your organization pretty well, this might not be relevant to you, but it could be a useful template. So check it out. We have this advertising ordinance that we discussed. We have a grant one-pager that we'd love for you to circulate with your fellow business and or nonprofit contracting whoever folks and let them know this grant exists. You can read the totally awesome and detailed grant proposal that we got approved by the commission to understand it at a much deeper level. We have information here about the required match for the grant. I'm going to touch on that in a moment. This is also a template for startup costs. August Granith, our director, did an interview with KZMU and talked about these grants. You can listen to that if that's an easier way for you to learn. Our profit and loss statement template is also here. Again, you can click here to register. And here's what I was talking about with those Utah state numbers. So if we click here and I do something like search for Science MOAB, they're a nonprofit in town, I can click on them here. So we're going to be going here when you submit your application to confirm you have this active status here. That means that you're all savvy with the state. It's more of a liability thing than anything. We think you're all great, but we can't be giving you money if you're not savvy with the state. That's just not something the county can be getting into. Also, when you fill out your application, you'll need this entity number and you'll need this NAICS or NAICS code down here. So this is a URL that's great to have, and it's also included in the application. On that note, I'm going to go to the STAR Business Grant and just talk about the differences from this grant. I'm going to look at the FAQ page really quickly, and then we're going to hop into the application. So back here on grandcountyutah.net/grant, I'm going to go down to the STAR Business Grant and click here. I'm going to have some water because I'm talking a lot. Okay, so same thing as the MOAB Tourism Grant. Below this, which will be gone after today, right under the banner image, you have the ability to apply. I will say that there are two different applications. They are not that different, but the one that is for less than $5,000 is slightly shorter. You can find them here. You have your requirements here for the STAR Business Grant. This is slightly different than the MOAB Tourism Grant. There are, at face value, fewer requirements, but the application for this grant is a little more detailed. So when you get into the application, you'll be filling out some of those requirements that we are looking for. If I go down here, I have the overview of this grant and the goal. And I really want to highlight this. This is really important. When we brought this grant proposal to the County Commission, we also had approved at the same time this economic diversification statement. Our office and the county has been talking about economic diversification for quite a while, but hadn't really defined it. And right now, this is the definition that we're using. We're looking for projects that are sustainable, livable, and resilient. So if you're applying for this grant and you get to the economic diversification question, really think about these three principles, maybe even mention them verbatim, loop them in and let us know how your project and how your organization really aligns with this. And if you have questions about this, again, please reach out to us. Some examples of applicable projects when we think about economic diversification, there are multiple indices that we're looking for, and I'll just talk about a few. Does this project help you acquire a larger or new production or commercial space? That would be awesome. Does it offset housing costs, such as renting a room for an employee? We are open to those kinds of projects. Can you train a worker in new skills and then raise their wages as a result? That would be wonderful. And as you'll see in the FAQ section, if your project poses to create a new job, we are requiring that that new job be at 110% of the median industry wage for that job. This is part of our sustainable, livable, resilient tenets that we just be creating good jobs in this county, not just jobs. And last but not least, creating new streams of revenue, such as e-commerce. This is a great way to diversify your product. Take something that is constrained to, our local economy and show the world, or just show Grand Junction. I'm not sure. Either way, these are some of the things we're thinking about. But again, with the tourism grant and with the STAR grant, we're looking for you to come up with something even better. So please don't feel constrained to these examples. We have the diversification action plan right here. If you want to read even more about economic diversification, you can, although I'll be honest, I've only read this once or twice. It kind of gets in the weeds. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Really just be thinking about these tenets and about these different indices we've posed here. Some other things that you might want to consider when you're talking about economic diversification are these two research papers that we like to cite. One is from the Economic Policy Institute that explains economic multiplier effects. The idea of an economic multiplier effect is if we give you money in your industry, we can look at industries across Utah or across the nation and see how far that dollar goes. How many jobs as a result of giving you money does that create, and or how much economic commerce does that create outside of your organization? We're really interested in that. If you are in an industry that has a really low economic multiplier effect, that doesn't disqualify you at all, but we'll be looking to see how are you coming up with novel ways to sort of buck that trend. And then right here, when we look at the Ken C. Gardner Policy Institute research, this explains Utah's economic diversity by county. The thing to understand here is that Grand County is not that economically diverse. This is more just for us to hammer home why we think this is important. It has less to do with your application, more to do with our grant. But it's good research, so check it out. And like I said, before we go into the application, I'm going to talk about the required match for each grant. So I'm going to click here. This information on required match is available on both the grant pages, and it's also linked inside the budget template. It's hard to lose, I promise. So when we're talking about a match, we have different percentages. For example, if you're applying to the STAR Business Grant and you're applying for $3,000, we're going to ask for a $300 match. That means that if you were to be awarded $3,000, we'd look for you to put forth $300 of your own funds. That being said, it gets a little different when you scroll down here. So definitely take a look at this document in your free time and ask me if you have questions. When it comes to the match, so for example, that $300 for that $3,000 grant, we're asking that half of that match come in cash. So now in our example, we're talking about $150. When we're talking about cash, we mean a lot of different things. If you're purchasing new materials or supplies for your project, that's your cash match. If you are hiring services or contractors that have to do with your project, that's your cash match. Paid labor, i.e. someone that already works for you and is dedicating their time specifically to that project, count their hours, multiply it by their pay rate, that's a cash match. And last but not least, if you purchase land or real estate, we will take 25% of that, assuming it's going towards your project, and that can be part of your cash match. So again, if we're talking about a $300 match, 150 of it has to be cash, and cash can be all of these sources here, i.e. cash is the work and the sweat that you're already putting into your project. So you don't have to go looking for money. If you're doing this project, I guarantee you, you're closer to meeting that cash match than you think you are. For the other half of your match, you can use the following sources: volunteers and or donated labor dedicated specifically to the project. We value this at $27.82 per hour. That was the Utah volunteer labor rate in 2020. They have not updated it because of inflation, but we still think that that's a pretty good rate, so we're going to run with that. So if I have a $300 match requirement, 150 of it can come from non-cash sources. That's pretty easy to meet if I get some volunteers involved. Similarly, donations dedicated to the specific project. If you get a donation, show us what you think the value is, show us how you arrived at that, and we will give you the full value, with the exception of land or real estate, again, which we're valuing at just 25%. We'd love to value it at 100%, but the fact of the matter is land costs a lot around here, and we want to see folks get involved in other ways. And last but not least, grants other than Grand County grants. So if you have other grants, you can use that as part of your non-cash source of match. I will add that if you are a nonprofit, you probably get a lot of your funding from grants. And if that grant is already in the bank, then that can be part of your cash match. If that grant is already in your finances and doesn't just exist in grant land, then that can be part of your cash match, because that is, how you stay running. However, if you have a grant that's coming, if you have a grant that you've applied to, that is going to be part of your non-cash source match. I know that can be a little confusing, so if you have individual questions about that, please let me know after the webinar. Okay, again, this is accessible through both the STAR Business Grant and the MOAB Tourism Grant pages right down here, information on required grant match, and it's also going to be in your budget templates. I'm going to show you where to find that in just a moment. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend to apply to one of these grants. We're going to go through it question by question. Please take any notes, and when we're done, we can talk about it. I'm going to do the apply for $5,000 or more, just because that's slightly more complicated. Just a few more questions. We're going to click here. And I will start by saying that if you have looked into the application process for this grant in the past week, it did not look anything like this. We heard your complaints. I heard your complaints. It was not that great, so I spent some time making it better. So now to apply to these grants, it's a Google form. It's as simple as that. I do have a note here that if you prefer to do a Microsoft Word document, we can still do that, and I will send it to you. You just let me know. But we would prefer that everyone just do it in a Google form. We think that's the easiest way to go about things. So I'm going to start here by adding my personal email, and I'm logged out of my Grand County email address. That way you can see me doing it just as if I'm not involved. So before I submit, I want to show you that right here, this will take you back to that STAR grant page that we were talking about. And right here, we do have access to both the budget templates in a Google Sheets form or a Microsoft Excel form. They'll both download as Excel spreadsheets. The Google Sheets one just works better that later if you want to work it in Google Sheets, you upload it and it'll play very nicely. Both of these, again, are designed to be very helpful to you in understanding your grant, your required grant match, and it's helpful for us to understand at a glance what your project looks like. I have a note here that it's probably best for you to do your budget first. There's a few reasons for that. The application focuses on brevity. If you want to talk more about line items, about resources, about expenses, the budget is not limited, and you can really go into detail there. But the application is limited, and we want folks to really be succinct. So I recommend that you do your budget first. Also, I recommend you do your budget first because we want everything to line up apples to apples with your application and your budget, and it probably just makes more sense to do the numbers first. So before I go on, I'll click on the Microsoft Excel budget template because I like that one a little bit better. It downloads here. I'm going to open it up right here. Let's see. Can everyone see that? Can I get a thumbs up if you're seeing it in the spreadsheet? No. Okay. You don't see it. Let me make sure. Okay. How about now? Okay. Thank you, Nuke Sunrise. All right. So when you open up this spreadsheet, I've done all kinds of fun things to help you. These two sections are highlighted. When you click on them, they give you little instructions on what you need to do. So I'm going to call my project, let's see, webinar. Once I've done that, it unhighlights because you're done. It looks really nice. I'm going to also type in my funding request. I'm going to say I'm applying for, I'll say I'm applying for $6,000. Now, because I've typed that in, I get my generated required match, and then I get these two checkboxes that are red right now. Those are going to turn green once I have met the requirements for the cash match and the proposed cash match in these cells over here. So again, this is just for us to understand at a glance that you've met the requirements, and it's for you so you don't have to keep referencing pages. Everything you need should be right here. Of course, like I said, if you want to check out that value of grant match page again, it is right here. You can click here and it just opened for me in this tab. And there it is again. So I promise it's hard to lose. So I have all this stuff right here. I'm just going to show you, for example, we have an objective, we have the activities required and the resources required. We're asking for an anticipated completion date. We're also asking for the total estimated cost to meet the stated objective. So right here, I have a note that says, regardless of any requested or actual financial assistance, i.e. this grant, what will this objective cost in total? That's again, it's great for us to understand how much skin in the game you have. Does this project really extend way past this grant? Is this grant just a small part of a huge thing? We want to know what you're up to. That gives us really good information about your commitment to your project. And then right here, if we have a $6,000 request, I'm just going to say that for one line item, I'm going to use $3,000, and for another line item, I'm going to use another $3,000. So I've used up my entire grant here. Now, if I'm talking about the cash match funds, I know personally, and you can read this on that value PDF, that if you're asking for 5,000 or more, the required match is 20%. And you can see that because the required match here is 1,200. So I'm going to say that I'm going to do, let's see, amount of cash match to be, okay, I'm going to do 600. I've met my cash match. See how that turned green there? We're all good. And now I'm going to do, let's see, how about 500 for non-cash match. Note that we are at a total of 1,100. We still haven't met that 1,200, so this is still a red X. But I'm going to add $100 here for my non-cash match, and now we're A-OK. Again, if I added, $500 here, and then I put, $12,000 here, we're going to have the opposite circumstance. We've met the total match. That's great, but half of it has to come from cash. So technically, you're not there yet. I hope this makes sense. The Google Sheet is very similar. It's just formatted differently to work better on Google Sheets. So if you have any questions about these, we can go over them after the webinar. So with that said, you can find those budget templates here. And on that note, we're going to pretend to apply to the grant. And making sure everyone can still see the grant application. Yeah? Okay, cool. So right here, we're going to start with the name of the organization. I'm going to do Grand County Economic Development. This is your doing business as. If you don't have a different doing business as name, you can just put the same thing. Your Utah entity number, we went over this, and you can click right here again to access that URL. You're going to type in whatever your organization is and grab that entity number right up here. When you do that, I would also stay there because you're going to be asked about your NAICS code down here. Organization email address, I'm going to put my personal email address, and hopefully you all don't hit me up there. Let's see. I'm going to put a phone number in here. I'm going to put an address there. And again, if these mailing and physical addresses are the same, then you can just, keep them the same. For your organization or entity type, we're keeping it kind of simple, nonprofit or for-profit, or if you have something else, you can just write it in. So we'll say I'm a contractor. I'm going to grab my NAICS code from that entity page, that's secure.utah.gov. Again, you can click here to get there. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and I'm going to grab that NAICS code. Plug it in right there, and we're good. Here, just tell us a little bit about your business, your nonprofit, whatever it is that you do. 300 characters max, that's about 3 sentences. There are more opportunities throughout the application to tell us what it is you're going to do with the grant and how you're working to expand your services. But right now, if you run the hot dog stand, then you can say, I sell hot dogs in the food truck park. There you go. Okay, this is about, theoretically, if you're watching this, this is about you. So if you are applying on behalf of an organization, whether you're part of it or not, this is the section where we want to know who's actually filling out the application. If there's a problem, who can we call? If there's an issue with the hot dog stand's application and I'm calling the manager, but the manager doesn't even know about the grant because they've farmed out that work, it's not going to work well for anyone. The deadline could approach and I can never get in touch with the person I need to. So make sure that when you fill out this authorized organization representative information, you are telling us who's going to be responsive, who's going to be responsible for the grant application, and who's going to be able to make changes or respond to questions if there are questions or changes to be made. So I'm going to put myself, and if you'll notice here, I do need to enter a valid email address. Please make sure you have one. Good old phone number, and because I live at work, I'm just going to put my work address. Okay, here, this is for you to name your project. Have some fun and give it a snazzy name, because when we're evaluating it, that's how we're going to say, okay, let's take a look at Project Zero Escape or Project Half Moon Hammy. I don't know. Also, maybe try and avoid using the word MOAB. I know we all love it here, but try and think of something else if possible. So I'm going to call my project, oops, I hit a button there. I'm going to call my project Good Times Webinar. Oh, it's a little too long. Good Times Web. Okay. This is for you to tell us how much money you're asking for. I'm going to say $6,000. What is your proposed match for this funding request? So here's a great question to keep in mind. We're kind of asking to see if you've read. So again, you can click here and read up on how you value your grant match, what that number needs to be. And what we're looking for is the minimum correct answer. So if I'm applying for $6,000 for this grant, then the answer is $1,200. But if you want to say, okay, well, I'm actually spending $10,000 on this project, so my match is actually way bigger than that, put it in there and, show off. And that's good for us to know. We're not going to, use this question to, qualify or disqualify or rank people above each other. But again, we're just curious about your investment in the project and to see if you've read. So I'm going to put in $1,200. Actually, I'll put in $800. There'll be a red flag for me later. And I'm going to estimate the total amount necessary to complete my project. Similar to what I was showing you in that column in the budget template, I want to know, regardless of this grant, What's the big picture for this project? How much does it cost to finish it? Is this grant just about the project and this grant is funding it alone? Or is this something that you're doing anyways and you just need some help doing it? So I'm going to say that the whole project actually costs a ton of money. Okay. Here you have 500 characters or about 5 sentences to describe your project. I know that that is a small amount of space, but I believe you can do it. And one of the reasons I know you can do it is because in the next question, you have another 1,000 characters to describe how you're going to make your project happen and how you're going to manage it. So in this question, which is almost as important to us as the project itself, we want to know how you're going to measure success, how you're going to benchmark, how you're going to tell us what you're up to, and how you're going to know for yourself the project is going well. So you've got about 1,500 characters to really describe your project and how it's going to happen. That's how I view these 2 questions. And I would use every character. We have 3 key staff members here. Oh, hold on one second. Hey, Charlotte, do you want to get in on the webinar? I have an in-person attendee. Here, you can just come and sit here. Of course, absolutely. Okay, I have an in-person attendee. Lovely. So we have, oh, can you turn the sound off? So weird to hear myself. You can just hang up the call. Okay, so in this space here, we're asking for 3 key staff members. You can list more. 3 key staff members should be probably 300 to 400 characters, maybe a little bit more. But basically, we're asking you to tell us who's going to be working on the project in addition to you, or if you're just the representative, if you're just applying on behalf of an organization, you know, who is doing the work? We want to know about that. I will note that in the sub 5K application, this question and the question next are condensed, so just a little less work for you. For this question afterwards, I'm just going to write Matt, Mike, and Mark. And we are going to ask for their title, their role in the project, and any relevant experiences or past successes. So what have they done and how is that going to help your project? Down here, we have a similar question. Other than yourself or your organization, who's going to do the work for your project? So we have those 3 key staff members, but maybe you have someone who you know is going to donate something, or you have 5 people who have said, I'm going to commit these amount of volunteer hours. We want to know about your collaborations, because not only does that show, you know, sweat equity and commitment to the project, but it also shows that, you know, you're a collaborator, you're working within the community and people have buy-in for your project. We want to see that people are excited about your project, not just yourself. So feel free to say something like, you know, I have enlisted AmeriCorps, you know, to work, you know, as they do. Briefly list all your key resources. So right here, you can list anything from volunteer labor to lumber. I would just say that keep it brief, literally just list the resources, use your project budget to really go into detail about why you're using what resource you're using. But here, I'm going to say something like, you know, sweat and bricks. Is your project already in progress? This is a brief yes or no. If yes, we want to hear about how it's going so far. And, you know, if you need more than 300 characters, let us know. But again, we just want a small update. Otherwise, you know, I'm going to say no. Does your project require construction and/or significant infrastructure modifications? I'm going to say no. And remember that if the answer is yes, you will need to submit those construction quotes. We accept those with a 20% contingency. And you can find information about those on the respective grant pages. This basically says, should Grand County Economic Development not want to give you or not be able to give you the entire fund, would you consider something smaller? I hope that you say yes, because, you know, I think it's not going to be a question of, is your project awesome, but do we have enough money to meet everyone's needs? So I'm going to say no, like a crazy person. It's either $6,000 or nothing. Okay, now we're going to talk about your project sustainability and your returns. I say returns because we're looking at returns on investment if you're in business, or returns on services if you're in the nonprofit world. Or maybe your returns are a little more abstract, especially if you're supporting someone through housing. So we want to know, What do you see as the outcome of this project? Why is it positive? It doesn't just have to be a dollar sign. The first question, though, is how you'll sustain your project after the funds run out. This is really important for both grants, especially the STAR Business Grant, but really both grants. We want to see that our funds are going towards something that can help either catalyze or, move something along, but we don't want this to be a one-off. We want to see that you've put in the forethought to create a project that has longevity, that has systems built in and people committed to it that will help it last outside of these grant funds. That's not a comment on if you're doing well in business or not. This is more of just us asking to make sure that this isn't a project that's just to grab some money from the grant fund. We want to see if this is going to something that you already need or you're going to need soon, and you're going to continue to have that need and therefore continue to sustain this project. So tell us about that. I'm going to say something silly like, I'm not going to sustain the project, in which case I'm probably not going to get the grant. I'm going to estimate my project's return on investment or services provided. So if I were something like a nonprofit and I provided services, I might say something more like 500 more meals delivered in the first year. And then, after 5 years, maybe it's 10,000 more meals delivered. Plus, we get to hire an AmeriCorps Vista. We all know those folks are just awesome, except they can't spell that well sometimes. And last but not least, we're going to ask you to explain the reasoning you used to estimate your returns above. So I'm going to write something snarky like, I'm a smart fella. Again, probably not in the running for the grant. Okay, we've talked about that required SBDC aspect. Here it is again. When you meet with Megan McFall with the Small Business Development Center, she's going to give us a code. That's how I know you've met with her. Again, that appointment is free and it is required, but it's free. And only good things can come from it. So book your appointment today. You can do it right here and get started. Yeehaw. If when you fill this out, you haven't met with her yet, but you're gonna, you can put your date of your meeting in here instead. Just know that we will be checking. So don't try and pull a fast one on us. So, I'm gonna put in the date of my meeting with Megan. I have two sections here for current projected financials, 1 and 2. The first one is excluding the award. So what's the trajectory for your business or nonprofit in the next year if you don't get this award? How are things looking? You can use numbers and qualitative discussion here. However you think you can best depict what things are looking like, do it here. Similarly, if you do get the grant, what do things look like in the next year? Again, you can use numbers, you can discuss things. You have 700 characters. I'm hoping that is enough, but again, if it isn't, please reach out to me and I'm sure we can figure something out, though we are focused on brevity here. So I'm going to say, for the next year, looking good. And for the next year, if I get the grant, looking great. All right, we have some other evaluation criteria points here. We want to know about your diversity engagement. How are you engaging the following groups? And it is not limited to these groups: women, non-binary individuals, the LGBTQ+ community, minority races and/or ethnicities, individuals with disabilities, and veterans. We want to know, are you an organization that has ownership in any of these categories? Are you managed by someone from any of these categories? Do you employ people or a person from these categories? And also, if this project is going to help you engage people from these categories. We want to know about this. You don't need to be concerned that you're not going to get the grant if your answer is, no, I don't line up with any of these things. However, if that is your answer, we would love to see a project that will help you engage people from these categories. So please consider that when you're filling out this question. I'm hoping 500 characters is enough, and please feel free to get as detailed as possible. This is a very diverse community, and if you think you can't come up with something, please reach out to me first, because I'm sure that you do have a good amount of diversity to your business or nonprofit, and you just haven't thought of it. Okay, let's see. I'm awesome. We're going to ask you to explain how your project aligns with community goals or does not oppose community goals. Note any potential quality of life concerns relevant to your project. This question is vague. Basically, we're looking for you to say that your project is not going to upset people or your project is going to make people really happy. When we talk about upsetting people, there are some ones that come to mind that are easy and that certainly the county has prioritized. If you are contributing to noise, not just from vehicles, but any kinds of noise, noise is a quality of life factor and folks are concerned about that. If you're contributing to, trail erosion or, the destruction of our natural resources, that's a huge quality of life concern. If you intend to dredge the Colorado River, that might be a huge problem. So I'm going to say, I plan to do nothing that will upset you, Ben. Of course, please give us a better answer than that. And explain how your organization contributes to or supports economic diversification in Grand County outside the scope of this project. So if you're applying to the STAR Business Grant, you've had opportunities to tell us about how this project contributes to economic diversification, which again, we can find a definition of which down here. Here's your opportunity to say, besides this project, these are all the other things that I do for economic diversification. So I'm going to say, I raise my employees' wages by 1,000% every month. Pretty awesome. We'd ask you here to explain any potential conflicts of interest related to your grant application. I cannot stress enough that filling out this section is not a red flag. If anything, I would say no answer to this is a red flag. It is a small community and I cannot avoid conflicts of interest in my life. I would be surprised if you could. So if you know someone in the county, if you know me, if you know someone on the evaluation committee, or you know someone else who's applied to a grant, just let us know here. That doesn't disqualify you at all. It makes me a lot more comfortable. So I'm going to say Ben knows Ben. And last but not least, you can select other Grand County grants you're intending to apply to. Now, I want to stress again that you cannot combine grants. However, you can apply different projects, all three grants. So you can apply to the STAR Business Grant, the MOAB Tourism Grant, and the Event Advertising Grant all in 1 year. And if your applications are awesome, we might give you all three grants. The thing to keep in mind is that none of those can be used on the same project. If you're an organization that has a very singular mission, and it's very hard to make distinctions of how those different grants will be used for different things, you need to make that really clear in your application because that is a concern for us. We're looking to make sure that these funds can benefit as many people as possible and can have that economic multiplier effect. So if I have an organization that's applied to all three grants, it is an uphill battle. You want to keep that in mind if you're going to apply to more than one. I'm going to click both because I'm ambitious. Here is your certification of accuracy. This is basically saying everything that I put here is true, and I commit to, if I win this grant, providing all kinds of reporting to Grand County Economic Development so that they know that the funds are being spent correctly and they know how to make a better grant next year. I have read and agreed to all the terms listed above. I'm going to click next. Last but not least, you have not submitted yet. Before you submit your application, please read the following section carefully. We've already gone over all of these things, but this is, again, just another point to remind you that by submitting this application, you're not guaranteed consideration. You still have all these requirements to meet. In the next week or so, I'm going to show everyone in Grand County how to submit these materials to us, but to our knowledge, no one's finished them yet, and we want you to focus on just getting them done. Submission will be very easy. But if you're applying to the STAR Business Grant, it's not just the application. You've got other things to do. If you're doing construction, we need those construction quotes. Everyone needs to meet with an SBDC officer in Blanding. We're going to need profit and loss statements and/or startup costs. We will need your project budget in one of the two templates we've provided, and we'll be checking your state of Utah Articles and Corporation number to make sure that you are an active business. So you can give us the number and we'll check. If you're not renewed, you're not going to be considered. So please make sure you go on today, make sure your business is active. And if it isn't, consider making it active very soon. You have an FAQ page here. And also, if you go to grandcountyutah.net/grants, there is a contact form at the bottom and you can reach out to us directly. Type in your name here and you've submitted. And again, it leads you back to grandcountyutah.net/grants. I'm going to check my notes here. The last thing I will show you is that both of the grant pages at the bottom link you to an FAQ page here. The FAQ page covers typical questions we've received for both of the grants, so it's not any particular grant. And we're updating this all the time with your good questions, so please keep sending them to me. This page is more useful, I would say, for those who are determining either specifics about their application or if they're eligible. Once you're getting into the weeds of the application, a lot of this will become clear, but please feel free to reference this and let us know if you think there's something missing. And again, here's that contact form. That way you can let us know if you have a question. Okay, so on that note, what I'm going to do is ask that if you have a question, please go to the chat. It's in the bottom right corner and say me or I have a question or something like that. And we're going to go one by one. I am going to give you all the ability to unmute, but I would ask that unless you're asking a question, please do keep yourself muted. And I'm going to start with the few questions that I do have in the chat right now.